Long ago, before humans ever ventured beyond their small corner of the stars, the Velkari Dominion had already become a name that inspired both fear and respect across many distant galaxies. Their rise did not happen overnight, it began slowly, like a spark that grew into a raging fire. The Velkari were a reptilian species with tall, slender bodies, scales that shone like metal, and eyes that glowed softly in the dark. They were not just physically imposing. They were clever, disciplined, and united in their vision to rule everything they could reach. Their homeworld, Velkar Prime, was a harsh and unforgiving place. The climate was unstable, with violent storms and extreme temperatures that changed rapidly. To survive, the Velkari had learned to adapt. They built strong cities under the ground to escape the surface storms. They created powerful technology to control the environment. And they learned how to work together like different parts of a single machine. Every Velkari had a role, and every role was critical to their survival. Over time, this survival instinct turned into ambition. If they could conquer their world, why not conquer others? The Velkari discovered faster-than-light travel earlier than most known civilizations. At first, they explored carefully, studying nearby systems and learning the strengths and weaknesses of the species they found. But soon their curiosity shifted into conquest. They sent their first fleet to a nearby star system where a peaceful aquatic civilization lived. The Velkari offered a choice: join the Dominion or be destroyed. The aquatic species tried to resist but had no real weapons. Within days, their cities were in ruins and their leaders were forced to kneel. The Velkari turned this planet into their first colony. Once they tasted victory, they never stopped. Their fleets grew larger, their technology more advanced, and their empire expanded like a wave. They developed enormous warships that could travel for decades without resupply, armed with devastating weapons and protected by near-impenetrable shields. Their armies were well-trained and loyal. They had no internal rebellion, no political divisions that slowed them down. Their leaders were selected through a system that valued strategy and intelligence above all else. And this made their military operations precise and terrifyingly efficient. For hundreds of years, they swept through star systems like a storm, wiping away resistance before it could grow. Some civilizations surrendered at the first sign of their fleets, hoping to avoid destruction. Others tried to fight but were quickly crushed. Each victory made them stronger. They absorbed the resources and technologies of the conquered worlds. Improving their own capabilities to the Velkari, war was not chaos. It was a carefully calculated operation. Every move had a purpose, and every conquest was just another step in their plan to control the Orion Spur and beyond. Their reputation spread far and wide. Many alien races whispered stories about the Dominion in fear. Traders and travelers spoke of massive fleets that darkened the stars, of entire worlds vanishing under their control within days. No one had been able to stop them, not even for a moment. If a planet resisted, it was turned to ash. If a fleet tried to fight back, it was broken into pieces. The Velkari were confident, even arrogant. They believed that their rise was destined, that no power in the galaxy could match their might. But their strength was not just in technology or numbers. It was in their mindset. They saw themselves as the rightful rulers of the stars. Every other species was either a potential subject or an obstacle to be removed. They did not waste time on diplomacy or alliances. They demanded submission and they expected obedience. Their empire stretched across thousands of light years. With hundreds of worlds under their rule, each colony supplied resources, soldiers, and information to fuel further expansion. By the time their fleets approached human space, they had already crushed dozens of advanced civilizations. They had faced plasma cannons, antimatter weapons, stealth fleets, and planetary shields, and they had beaten them all. They had developed counter-strategies for almost every known form of defense. And their admirals had centuries of experience. To them, humanity was just another minor civilization in their path. The Velkari believed there was no force left in the galaxy that could challenge them. They had met no equal, and in their minds they never would. Their rise was like a story told in hushed tones, a warning to anyone who dared to stand against them. They were unstoppable, they were inevitable, or at least, that's what everyone believed, until they met one human warship that refused to move. Far away from the grand and dangerous movements of the Velkari Dominion, humanity lived in a quiet corner of space. Unlike the ancient alien empires that had existed for thousands of years, humans were still newcomers to the stars. It had only been a few centuries since they left their home planet, Earth, and began to build colonies among distant stars. At first, their steps were small and uncertain. They started with nearby planets in their own solar system, learning how to survive in places that were cold, airless, and harsh. Over time, their technology improved, and their hunger to explore grew stronger. They built faster ships, developed better life support systems, and discovered ways to create artificial gravity. Slowly but surely, they began to spread out, one system at a time. Their colonies were not grand or powerful like the Valkyrie cities. Instead, they were practical, tough, and filled with people who carried the same fearless curiosity that had driven explorers on Earth centuries earlier. Many of these colonies began on planets that were difficult to live on, with thin air, rocky ground, or wild storms. But humans adapted quickly. They built domed cities, underground shelters, and used terraforming machines to make the environments more livable. Humanity's expansion was not controlled by a single empire. There was no one supreme ruler. Instead, different groups, nations, and organizations claimed different planets and star systems. Some were run by governments, others by corporations, and some by independent settlers who wanted a new life far from Earth's politics. This made human space diverse and sometimes chaotic, but it also made it unpredictable. If one colony failed, another might rise. If one group fought, another would trade and build. It was a messy kind of growth, but it worked. Compared to alien empires, humans did not have the most advanced technology. Their warships were not the biggest, and their fleets were not the most organized. Many alien observers saw humanity as weak or unimportant, just another young civilization making noise in a quiet corner. The Valkyrie, with their vast experience and military power, barely paid attention to humans at all. They saw them as a species that could be easily conquered, perhaps even used as a workforce. But what most alien observers did not fully understand was the unique way humans thought and acted. Humans had a strange ability to adapt to unexpected situations. They could improvise in the heat of the moment, turning failure into opportunity. They were also fiercely independent. Each colony valued its freedom and identity. Even when they were part of larger alliances like the United Nations Stellar Coalition, which worked to keep peace among the different human settlements. Human society in space was full of stories of daring individuals, explorers who charted dangerous hyperspace routes, engineers who repaired broken stations in the middle of nowhere, and settlers who built thriving towns on barren worlds. This spirit made human space lively and full of surprises. Trade routes stretched between colonies, carrying goods like food, technology, rare minerals, and even art. Ships came and went daily, creating a vast web of movement that connected distant worlds together. Unlike the Valkyrie, humans were not focused on domination. They were focused on survival, growth, and discovery. Their military fleets existed, but they were mostly there to protect colonies from pirates, dangerous anomalies, or the occasional hostile alien encounter. They had never faced a massive invading empire before, so they did not prepare for such a situation on a large scale. To them, the galaxy was a vast frontier filled with opportunities. Not a battlefield still. There were a few who warned that this peaceful era might not last forever. Some military strategists pointed out how small humanity was compared to the older empires that existed farther away. They spoke of alien civilizations with technology centuries ahead, and fleets that could crush entire star systems. But for most people, those warnings felt distant, like bedtime stories meant to scare children. After all, no alien empire had ever threatened human space seriously. Humanity was left alone, growing quietly. One of the shining examples of human achievement was the colony of New Horizon, located near the outer edge of human territory. It was a vibrant world with a growing population, modern cities, and rich natural resources. Traders loved to stop there because it sat along a busy hyperspace route that connected several other colonies. For many, New Horizon represented the hope and future of human expansion, a symbol that humanity could create something lasting among the stars. In this peaceful corner of space, humans had become comfortable, maybe too comfortable. They believed that their diplomacy, technology, and distance from powerful empires would keep them safe. Their fleets were small, their defenses were modest, and their focus was more on trade and exploration than war. Few expected that this calm would be broken. Few imagined that a force like the Valkyrie Dominion would suddenly appear at their doorstep. When alien observers looked at humanity, They often saw only their weaknesses, their lack of unity, their smaller fleets, their scattered colonies. But what they missed was the quiet strength that came from their unpredictability and determination. Humans were not the strongest, but they were stubborn, clever, and willing to fight when pushed into a corner. In this quiet period, humanity thrived, building their future among the stars without knowing that a storm was approaching. They did not yet realize that their small, underestimated fleets and their fierce independence would soon be tested against one of the greatest empires the galaxy had ever seen. In the shadows of distant stars, destiny was moving toward them, and everything they had built was about to face its greatest challenge. The first encounter between humanity and the Valkyrie Dominion did not happen through peaceful talks or a grand meeting between leaders. It began with a sudden, unexpected arrival near the outer edges of human space. The colony of New Horizon was the closest human world to the direction from which the Valkyrie fleet came. For years, New Horizon had been a place of growth, trade, and exploration. People there lived normal lives, raising families, building businesses, and believing they were far away from any danger. But one ordinary day turned into a moment that would change history forever. The early warning stations near the system picked up strange energy signatures. At first, the human operators thought it might be a group of traders or a new exploration fleet, but the signals were far stronger and more organized than anything they had ever seen. Dozens of massive ships appeared from hyperspace one after another, forming a perfect formation. Their hulls were dark and smooth, glowing with lines of alien energy that looked both beautiful and terrifying. The Valkyrie fleet had arrived. New Horizons' defense forces were small. The colony had a few orbital defense platforms and a modest patrol fleet, meant to deal with pirates or smugglers. Nothing close to what was needed to face a full military armada. The colony's governor quickly contacted the United Nations Stellar Command. Sending distress signals across human space, they asked for help. But everyone knew reinforcements would take time. The Valkyrie were already in the system. The Valkyrie did not attack immediately. Instead, they followed their usual method of conquest. They sent a compliance envoy, a single elegant but heavily shielded vessel. It broadcast a clear message across all frequencies in a cold, precise voice. The translation came through almost instantly. This world now belongs to the Valkyrie Dominion. Surrender your authority, submit your population, and you will be spared. Refuse and face destruction. The message spread through New Horizon like a wildfire. People gathered in public squares, offices, and homes, watching the transmission on every screen. Some were shocked, some were angry, and others were terrified. The Valkyrie voice had no emotion, no hint of negotiation. It was not an offer, it was a command. The governor of New Horizon, a calm and determined leader named Elias Grant, refused to accept this threat. He broadcast his own reply. This is human space. We will not surrender to anyone. The Valkyrie envoy gave the colony 1 hour to change its decision. During that time, human military officers scrambled to activate every defense they had. Pilots rushed to their ships, engineers powered up shield generators, and civilians were ordered to move to underground shelters. People hoped that maybe, just maybe, the aliens would be bluffing. But the Valkyrie did not bluff. Exactly 1 hour later, the sky above New Horizon lit up. The Valkyrie fleet opened fire with terrifying precision. Their beams cut through human defense platforms as if they were made of paper. Patrol ships tried to fight back but were destroyed within minutes. Explosions shook the atmosphere as burning fragments fell to the ground. Cities lost power as orbital stations were ripped apart. The colony's defenses did manage to land a few hits on smaller enemy ships, but it made little difference. The bombardment was not meant to completely destroy the planet, but to break its will. The Valkyrie targeted communication hubs, military structures, and key energy stations. Within a few hours, New Horizon was silent. Its once bright orbital ring floated in pieces. The governor's emergency broadcast was the last transmission sent before the main control center was hit. His final words were, "Humanity will not bow," before the signal cut out. For the Valkyrie, this was just another step in their conquest. They had crushed countless worlds before, but for humanity, this was their first real encounter with a power that saw them as nothing more than another target. News of the attack traveled through hyperspace channels faster than any fleet could move. Colonies received the report and were stunned. People who had believed they lived in a peaceful corner of the galaxy suddenly realized they were not alone, and not safe. In human space stations and cities, people watched the shaky footage captured during the battle. It showed alien ships moving in terrifying harmony, beams slicing through defenses and explosions lighting up the darkness of space. The destruction of New Horizon became the first moment when humanity understood what they were facing. It wasn't pirates or rival colonies. It was an empire older, stronger, and far more experienced in war. Panic began to spread among some colonies, but it was mixed with something else too: anger. The attack on New Horizon was seen as a brutal violation, a direct insult to human independence. Leaders across different colonies held emergency meetings, debating how to respond. The United Nations Stellar Command called for mobilization, though they knew their fleets were scattered and unprepared. Meanwhile, in the ruins of New Horizon, a few survivors hid in underground shelters, waiting for help. Some recorded messages telling their loved ones what had happened. Their voices were filled with fear and disbelief. "They came out of nowhere," one survivor whispered into a recorder. "We didn't stand a chance." The Valkyrie sent another message to human space shortly after the bombardment. It was short and final. "This world resisted and paid the price. Others will follow." It was a warning meant to frighten, but instead, it lit a fire. The tragedy of New Horizon became a symbol, not of defeat but of a challenge. For the first time in centuries, humanity faced a threat that united them in purpose. The first contact had ended in tragedy, but it was only the beginning. What the Valkyrie did not understand was that humans, when pushed, did not simply surrender. The destruction of New Horizon was about to awaken something in humanity that no alien empire had ever encountered before: a determination to fight back, even against impossible odds. After the fall of New Horizon, panic spread through human space like a shockwave. Colonies that had once felt safe now feared they might be next. Leaders argued, fleets scrambled to regroup, and civilians began to prepare for the worst. In the middle of this chaos, the United Nations Stellar Navy made a quick but bold decision. They could not send an entire fleet to stop the Valkyrie advance because it would take too long to gather ships from distant systems. But they could send one vessel immediately, one ship to delay the enemy, one ship to make a stand. That ship was the UNS Resolute, an aging dreadnought that had served for more than 2 decades. It wasn't the newest or the fastest ship in the Navy, but it was reliable, powerful, and had recently been upgraded with experimental systems. The Resolute was not designed to defeat a full alien armada. No single human ship was. But it could hold a strategic position, create a delay, and buy precious time for reinforcements to arrive. The Resolute was stationed near a key hyperspace corridor that connected the outer colonies to the core of human space. This corridor was narrow, surrounded by unstable gravitational rifts that made navigation dangerous. Only one ship at a time could pass safely through it. If the Valkyrie reached that corridor, they would have a direct path to dozens of undefended human worlds. Stopping them there was humanity's only chance to prevent a larger disaster. At the center of this mission was Captain Miriam Hale, a woman whose name was already well known among military circles. She was a seasoned officer, known for her sharp mind and calm under pressure. Throughout her career, she had gained a reputation for using clever, unexpected tactics. Some admired her. Others thought she took too many risks, but in moments of crisis, she was exactly the kind of leader people followed without hesitation. When Captain Hale received the emergency orders, she did not hesitate. She called her crew together in the main briefing room. The atmosphere was tense but focused. Everyone on board understood the gravity of their mission. "We are not here to run," she told them in a steady voice. "We are here to stand, to hold the line, and to show the enemy what it means to face humanity." Her words echoed through the ship's corridors, filling the crew with a mix of fear and pride. The Resolute's crew was a mix of experienced veterans and young recruits. Some had seen combat before, but none had ever faced an enemy like the Valkyrie. Engineers worked around the clock to reinforce the ship's shields and weapon systems, loading ammunition, calibrating targeting systems, and preparing emergency repairs. Pilots checked the hangar bays, readying the few fighter squadrons on board. Medics set up triage stations, knowing that if the worst came, they would have to deal with heavy casualties. As the Resolute moved into position at the edge of the corridor, sensors showed empty space ahead, but everyone knew that wouldn't last. The Valkyrie were advancing quickly. Their fleets were massive and their discipline unmatched. But the corridor gave the Resolute an advantage. It was a natural bottleneck. A single well-placed ship could delay a much larger force if it used the terrain wisely. Captain Hale spent hours studying old battle records, simulations, and tactical maps. She gathered her officers and laid out a plan. They would not simply sit and wait to be destroyed. They would use every trick available: ambush tactics, sudden strikes, decoy maneuvers, and strategic retreats to lure the enemy into vulnerable positions. She understood that the enemy expected humans to panic and retreat. Instead, she would turn their expectations against them. While the crew prepared, messages from other colonies poured in. Some were filled with hope, others with desperation. Families sent messages to loved ones serving on the Resolute, telling them to be brave. News broadcasts picked up the story, calling the Resolute the line between survival and conquest. People across human space watched anxiously, waiting to see what would happen. Despite the growing fear, there was also a strong sense of determination on board. The crew understood that their mission wasn't just about defending a corridor. It was about sending a message to both the Velkari and humanity. If they could hold the line even for a short time, it would prove that the Velkari were not unstoppable. It would give other fleets time to organize and give civilians hope. As the Resolute approached the mouth of the corridor, the stars outside the viewing deck seemed strangely calm. The crew could feel the tension in the air. Like the quiet before a storm, Captain Hale stood on the command bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, staring at the starfield ahead. She had fought in many battles before, but never one like this. She knew that history would remember what happened next, whether they lived or died. In those final hours before the Velkari arrived, the Resolute became more than just a warship. It became a symbol, a single spark standing against a tidal wave. No one on board expected an easy victory. Many of them wrote final messages to their families, stored in the ship's memory banks to be sent if they didn't make it. Yet not one person requested to abandon the mission. The Velkari fleet was on its way, and soon, the silence of space would be broken by the clash of two forces, one ancient and mighty, the other young but fiercely determined. As the Resolute locked into position, Captain Hale gave the order to power up all systems. The ship hummed with energy, weapons glowed softly, and shields shimmered to life. It was ready to face the storm. No one could predict exactly what would happen, but everyone on board knew one thing for certain. The Velkari were about to meet something they had never encountered before. Not just a ship, but the unyielding spirit of humanity. The UNS Resolute reached the edge of the hyperspace corridor, just as the first warning signals came in. The Velkari fleet was on the move, their formation perfect and their speed terrifying. But the corridor was their only path forward. This narrow channel through space was surrounded by unstable gravitational fields. No large fleet could bypass it safely. If the Velkari wanted to reach the human core worlds, they had to come through here. And standing right in their way was one single human warship. The corridor itself was a strange place. It was like a tunnel made of invisible forces. On either side of it, space rippled unpredictably, pulling and twisting anything that came too close. Many explorers had tried to fly around it in the past, but most never returned. It was the perfect choke point, and Captain Miriam Hale understood this better than anyone. She had chosen this place not because she believed her ship could win against the Velkari, but because here, strategy could make up for lack of numbers. The Resolute floated at the entrance of the corridor, silent but ready. Its engines hummed softly, weapons were powered up, and shield generators pulsed like a heartbeat. Inside the ship, the crew moved quickly and quietly. Each person knew their role. Pilots checked their flight paths, engineers adjusted shield frequencies, and gunners monitored targeting systems. The air was thick with tension. Everyone knew that once the Velkari arrived, there would be no escape. Captain Hale stood on the bridge, watching the stars ahead. She had placed the ship in a defensive position that forced any approaching enemy to come straight at them. There was no way to outflank in this narrow space. She had also ordered the deployment of small sensor buoys and stealth drones hidden in the gravitational edges. These would act like invisible eyes, giving her early warnings and the ability to strike from unexpected angles. As the Velkari fleet drew closer, their signals became stronger one by one. Massive alien warships emerged from hyperspace. Their dark, sharp hulls reflected no light, making them look like moving shadows against the stars. They came in a perfect line, their engines glowing with a cold blue light. It was a sight that could make anyone feel small. The Valkyrie did not rush. They approached with calm confidence, as if they were certain nothing could stop them. The crew of the Resolute watched in silence. Some swallowed nervously, others clenched their fists. A few whispered quiet prayers for a moment. Space was quiet except for the steady beeping of scanners. Captain Hale's voice finally broke the silence. "All stations, battle readiness," she said firmly. Her words traveled through the ship, and every crew member snapped into full focus. The Valkyrie sent out a standard transmission. It was the same cold voice that had been heard on New Horizon. "Human vessel, this corridor is now under Valkyrie Dominion control. Stand down, surrender your ship, or be destroyed." It was not a negotiation. It was an order. Captain Hale did not hesitate. She gave her reply in a calm but powerful voice. "This is human space. You will not pass." Her message echoed through every Valkyrie channel, a simple declaration that carried the weight of defiance. For a brief moment there was silence after her message. Then the Valkyrie ships shifted into attack formation. It was like watching a machine made of hundreds of parts moving as one. Their first line advanced slowly, scanning for traps. Their confidence was unshaken after all. They had crushed countless civilizations before. One human warship was nothing to them. But Captain Hale had prepared carefully. The moment the Valkyrie entered the outer range, the Resolute launched a wave of stealth drones from the gravitational edges. The drones activated their jammers, creating false sensor readings and confusing the enemy's targeting systems. At the same time, the Resolute fired its long-range railguns, sending metal projectiles flying at incredible speed. The Valkyrie shields absorbed some of the hits, but a few slipped through, damaging smaller ships in the front line. The Valkyrie responded with a blast of energy beams that lit up the corridor like a storm. The Resolute's shields flared under the pressure but held. Captain Hale ordered the ship to shift slightly, using the corridor's gravitational currents to make the enemy's aim less precise. It was a dangerous maneuver, but it forced the Valkyrie to adjust their formation. As more Valkyrie ships entered the corridor, the space around them became crowded. Their large size worked against them. They couldn't move freely without risking collisions or being pushed into the unstable gravitational edges. Captain Hale saw this and exploited it. She focused her attacks on key ships in the formation, targeting their engines to slow them down. This created traffic jams inside the corridor, something the Valkyrie were not used to dealing with inside the Resolute. The battle felt like a heartbeat growing faster and faster. Orders were shouted, alarms blared, and the ship shook with each impact. The crew worked like a single organism, repairing damaged systems and returning fire again and again. Every time a Valkyrie ship tried to push forward, the Resolute was there to block the way, like a rock standing against a raging river. The longer the battle lasted, the more frustrated the Valkyrie became. They were not used to being delayed. Their strategies depended on quick, overwhelming victories, but here in this narrow corridor, their numbers meant nothing. They could not surround, they could not outmaneuver. All they could do was push forward and hope to crush the lone human ship. Captain Hale kept her cool throughout the chaos. She gave clear, sharp commands, adjusting strategies on the fly. She used the corridor itself as a weapon, timing her attacks with the gravitational pulses to throw the enemy off balance. Every minute they held the line was a minute closer to reinforcements arriving. From distant human colonies, people watched the live battle feed in awe. They saw one ship standing against an entire empire. The sight filled them with both fear and pride. The Resolute wasn't supposed to win, but it wasn't losing either. It was holding, fighting, and showing the Valkyrie something they had never encountered before. Resistance that refused to break. The blockade at the edge of the stars had begun, and the outcome would decide more than just the fate of a corridor. It would decide whether humanity would be remembered as a species that surrendered without a fight, or one that stood tall against impossible odds. And at that moment, as the Valkyrie kept pressing forward and the Resolute refused to move, history was being written in the silence of space, one railgun shot at a time. The silence of space shattered the moment the Valkyrie opened fire. Their beams sliced through the darkness like lightning, filling the narrow hyperspace corridor with brilliant flashes of energy. The Resolute's shields flared under the impact, waves of light rippling across its hull. For the crew inside, it felt like being in the middle of a thunderstorm. Alarms ringing, voices shouting commands, and the floor trembling with every hit. The battle had begun, The Velkari formation advanced with mechanical precision. Their ships moved like pieces on a chessboard, every motion calculated. Their fleet commander clearly expected to crush the lone human vessel within minutes. It was what they had done countless times before, but Captain Miriam Hale had no intention of letting them dictate the flow of the fight. She immediately ordered a maneuver that took full advantage of the corridor's tight space. The Resolute rotated slightly, placing its strongest shields toward the incoming fire, and using the gravitational edges to distort enemy targeting systems. The first exchange of fire was brutal. The Resolute's railguns and missile batteries struck at the Velkari's front line, targeting their engines and weapon arrays. The Velkari ships responded with concentrated energy blasts aimed at the Resolute's command bridge and main reactor. Their attacks were relentless, but the old dreadnought held firm. Its armor groaned under the strain, but it did not break. Inside, engineers worked feverishly to reroute power, repair damaged shield emitters, and keep the ship alive. The Velkari underestimated how difficult it would be to fight in the corridor. Their larger ships struggled to maneuver. They couldn't spread out or flank, and their own numbers worked against them. When one ship slowed or exploded, it created a traffic jam that forced the ships behind it to adjust. Captain Hale saw this weakness immediately. She focused her attacks on key ships in the middle of the formation, hitting them hard enough to slow their progress but not enough to make them explode instantly. This forced the Velkari to break their perfect rhythm, something they were not used to. Meanwhile, the Resolute's fighter squadrons launched from their bays, darting through the corridor like wasps. They targeted enemy sensor arrays, shield emitters, and weapon turrets. Their small size made them hard to hit, and their constant harassment distracted the Velkari. For every fighter shot down, 2 more struck key points on enemy vessels. It was not about overpowering the enemy. It was about disrupting their perfect machine-like operation. Captain Hale also made clever use of the stealth drones placed earlier, along the gravitational edges. At key moments, she activated them to release bursts of electronic interference. This created false sensor readings, making it appear as if more human ships were approaching from behind or from the side. The Velkari briefly adjusted their formation to face phantom threats, giving the Resolute precious seconds to reposition and strike. Inside the ship, the crew fought like a single living being. Every station was alive with movement. Communications officers relayed rapid updates, gunners targeted weak spots, engineers patched holes in the shield network, and medics rushed to treat those injured by hull tremors and fires. Even though the Velkari were far stronger in raw power, the human crew's adaptability kept them in the fight. They changed tactics constantly, never giving the enemy a stable pattern to exploit. Hours passed like minutes. The battle dragged on far longer than the Velkari expected. Normally, a single ship would have been destroyed within moments, but the Resolute stood like a wall. Every time the Velkari pushed, it pushed back. Each wave of attacks cost them time, and time was exactly what Captain Hale wanted to steal. She knew reinforcements were on the way. If she could delay the fleet long enough, humanity would have a real chance to fight back. The Velkari grew frustrated. Their doctrine relied on overwhelming force and perfect execution. Not prolonged fights, their commander ordered an all-out push, concentrating multiple battleships to break through the human line. The corridor erupted into chaos as their front ships fired simultaneously, beams converging on the Resolute's shields. The impact was devastating. The ship shook violently. Several compartments lost power, and parts of the outer armor were scorched, but the shields held just enough in response. Captain Hale executed a daring maneuver. She ordered the ship to drift backwards slowly into a denser part of the corridor. This forced the Velkari to follow her into a zone where gravitational anomalies were stronger. Their precise movements became less coordinated. A few ships were slightly pulled off course, colliding with each other or scraping dangerously close to the edges. In that moment of disarray, the Resolute fired everything it had: missiles, railguns, and pulse cannons targeting a battleship at the front. The combined strike broke through its shields and caused its reactor to overload. The explosion was massive, tearing through several nearby ships. The shockwave filled the corridor with debris, forcing the Velkari to slow down again. It was the first time in centuries that their fleet had been stopped like this. Their commanders could not believe that a single human ship had created such chaos. For humanity watching through long-distance feeds, the sight of a Velkari battleship exploding was electrifying. It showed that the enemy could bleed. The clash of titans continued deep into the night. or what passed for night in space, the Valkyrie brought their full power. But the Resolute answered with every ounce of cleverness and determination humanity could muster. What began as a one-sided encounter slowly turned into a strategic deadlock. The Valkyrie were stronger, but the humans were unpredictable. By the time the first human reinforcements began to pick up signals of the battle, the Valkyrie fleet was still trapped in the corridor, facing a single battered but unbroken ship. The Resolute had done more than anyone expected. It hadn't just held the line, it had changed the rules of the fight. The clash between the Valkyrie Dominion and the UNS Resolute was no longer just a battle. It had become a test of will. The aliens fought with power, the humans with heart. And for the first time in centuries, the Valkyrie were facing an enemy they couldn't simply crush. They were facing a force that refused to yield. As the battle dragged on, the Valkyrie fleet found itself in a situation it had never experienced before. Their strategy was built on speed and overwhelming power. But hours had passed, and they were still stuck in the corridor facing one single human ship. The Resolute had taken heavy damage, its armor scorched, several sections sealed off, and parts of the ship running on emergency power. But it was still standing. The crew was exhausted but focused, every person pushing themselves far beyond their limits. The Valkyrie commanders decided that the time for patience was over. They gathered their strongest ships in the front, forming a spearhead meant to crush the Resolute in one decisive attack. Their plan was simple: focus all energy beams, missiles, and ramming vessels in one massive charge that would overwhelm the human ship's shields and break through the corridor. It was a tactic that had worked countless times before against other species, but Captain Miriam Hale had anticipated something like this. She studied the Valkyrie patterns throughout the fight. Noting how they reacted under pressure, she could sense that they were becoming desperate. And desperate enemies made mistakes. As the Valkyrie spearhead advanced, the corridor filled with blinding light from their combined weapons fire. The Resolute's shields flared like a star, struggling to absorb the impact. Systems all over the ship flickered, some failed entirely. Fire crews rushed to control blazes in damaged compartments, and medics carried injured crew members through smoke-filled hallways. It looked like the end was near. The Valkyrie were pushing harder than ever before, and the Resolute was running out of power, but Captain Hale refused to give up. She ordered a risky maneuver that even her officers hesitated to execute. She commanded the ship to power down most of its external systems, making it look as if the Resolute's shields had finally failed. From the outside, it seemed like the ship was drifting helplessly, a broken defender ready to fall. The Valkyrie, seeing this, increased their speed, eager to finish the fight and crush the last resistance as they closed in. The Resolute suddenly reactivated its weapons and fired a concentrated volley at the lead Valkyrie battleship. Hale had been waiting for them to get close enough. The attack hit the enemy ship right in its exposed side, where their overlapping shields were weakest. The explosion tore through the spearhead formation, sending shockwaves down the corridor. Several Valkyrie ships collided with each other as their perfect formation broke apart. The sudden turn of events gave the Resolute a few precious minutes to breathe. But the real turning point came not just from tactics, it came from reinforcements far away. Human fleets had been rushing toward the battle since the distress call from New Horizon. When they finally picked up the battle signals, they couldn't believe what they were seeing: a single human warship holding off a Valkyrie armada. The sight inspired them. They pushed their engines to the limit. Arriving sooner than expected, the first reinforcements to arrive were a squadron of heavy cruisers and support carriers. They emerged from hyperspace behind the Valkyrie fleet, catching the enemy completely off guard. The Valkyrie had focused all their attention forward on the Resolute, and had not expected a second wave to appear from behind. The human cruisers opened fire immediately, targeting the Valkyrie's rear ships, which were less protected and already struggling with the cramped corridor. The Valkyrie suddenly found themselves trapped. The Resolute blocked the front, and the reinforcements attacked from the back. Their formation, which had been designed for smooth forward assault, became a cage. Their large ships couldn't turn easily, and panic began to spread through their lower ranks. Something they had never experienced before was happening. They were losing control of the battlefield. Captain Hale, even with her ship heavily damaged, saw the moment and seized it. She ordered a coordinated attack with the arriving fleet. Her ship targeted the remaining ships in the front while the cruisers pounded the rear. Missiles and beams filled the corridor, lighting it up like a burning tunnel. The Velkari, for all their power, could not respond effectively. Their spearhead was shattered, their escape route blocked. For the first time in centuries, a Velkari commander gave the order to retreat. It was not a strategic withdrawal to lure the enemy somewhere else. It was a genuine retreat born from surprise and frustration. They began to pull their ships back through the corridor, but even this was difficult. Their damaged vessels collided as they tried to reverse. The retreat turned chaotic. Human forces didn't chase them deep into space. They weren't ready for a full counterattack, but they had done something no other species had ever done. They had stopped a Velkari advance and forced them to turn back. The entire battle had lasted longer than anyone predicted, but in the end, the Velkari fleet began vanishing back into hyperspace, one ship after another. When the last alien ship disappeared, the corridor fell silent again. The Resolute floated in place, battered but still alive. Its crew cheered weakly, some cried. Others simply collapsed from exhaustion. They had survived the impossible. On the command bridge, Captain Hale stood quietly, staring at the empty stars. Her ship had held the line long enough, and humanity had answered the call across human space. News of the battle spread like wildfire. Colonies that had been filled with fear now felt pride. They saw that the Velkari were not gods. They were powerful, but they could be resisted. The image of the Resolute standing alone against the alien fleet became a symbol overnight. Artists painted it. Broadcasters replayed the battle footage again and again, and children began to learn Captain Hale's name. For the Velkari Dominion, the battle was a shock. They had never retreated before. Their leaders were forced to rethink their strategies and study this strange, stubborn species that refused to follow the pattern of easy conquest. They realized that humanity was different. Unpredictable and dangerous, the turning point had arrived. What began as a one-sided invasion ended as the moment the Velkari met their first real obstacle. A single human warship, backed by brave reinforcements, had changed the course of history. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. When the last Velkari ship disappeared into hyperspace, a deep silence filled the corridor. The stars returned to their calm stillness, as if nothing had happened. But for the humans who had fought there, everything had changed. The Resolute floated quietly, its hull scarred and burned, parts of it still smoking from fires that had not yet been fully put out. The once proud dreadnought looked battered, but it was still alive, and that was enough to make history inside the ship. The crew slowly began to realize what they had achieved. Some sat down where they stood, too tired to move. Others hugged each other, laughing and crying at the same time. Engineers crawled through damaged sections, amazed that the ship was still holding together after the punishment it had taken. Medics worked through crowded corridors, treating the injured, while the bridge crew stared at their screens in disbelief. The enemy was gone. They had actually done it. Captain Miriam Hale stood on the command bridge, watching the empty starfield through the wide viewing window. She didn't smile, but a quiet satisfaction filled her heart. Her crew had done everything she asked and more. They had faced the strongest empire in the galaxy and held their ground. She knew that the cost had been high. Many crew members were injured, some had died, and the ship itself would need months of repair. But what mattered most was that they had not allowed the Velkari to pass. News of the battle spread across human space faster than any fleet could travel. Every colony, station, and outpost received the message. At first, many thought it was a mistake. How could one human ship stop an entire Velkari armada? But then the battle recordings started to circulate, showing the Resolute standing alone, the massive Velkari fleet crashing against it like waves against a rock. People watched the footage again and again, unable to believe their eyes. In cities across human worlds, crowds gathered to watch the transmissions on large public screens. They saw the moment the Velkari spearhead broke apart. The arrival of reinforcements and the retreat of the alien fleet. Cheers erupted in streets, people waved flags, and songs were written almost overnight. The name Resolute became known everywhere. Children played games pretending to be its crew, shouting, "Hold the line!" As they imagined fighting alien fleets, the crew of the Resolute became heroes. Not just soldiers, but living legends. News reporters and historians rushed to collect their stories. Interviews were broadcasted across the colonies. Some crew members were shy, others proud, but all of them shared one thing in common. They had been part of something greater than themselves. The world called them the shield of humanity. a symbol of courage and unity in a time of fear. Captain Hale received both praise and responsibility. She was awarded the highest honors humanity could give. But more importantly, she became a figure that inspired millions. Her calm leadership, clever tactics, and refusal to surrender became lessons taught in military academies. Strategic officers studied her decisions frame by frame, trying to understand how a single ship managed to hold off such overwhelming power. Her battle was no longer just a moment in time. It became a case study, a story passed down through generations. For the Velkari Dominion, the battle was a wound to their pride. For centuries, they had expanded without challenge. Their victories were fast and absolute. No one had ever stopped them, but now, for the first time, they had met resistance they could not simply crush. The retreat from the corridor became a topic of heated debate among their leaders. Some demanded a stronger second invasion, while others, more cautious, warned that humanity was not like their previous enemies. Humans were unpredictable, clever, and willing to fight against impossible odds. Velkari intelligence networks began collecting every piece of information they could about humanity. Studying their technology, their strategies, and their psychology, they realized that while human ships were not the most advanced, their commanders thought in ways that were difficult to predict. This unpredictability made them dangerous. The Velkari understood that their future expansion would not be as easy as before. Back on Earth and other human core worlds, the victory changed everything. Before the battle, many colonies had been fearful, divided, and unsure how to respond to such a powerful enemy. But after the resolute stand, a new sense of unity spread through humanity. Colonies that had once argued over politics and trade began to work together. Military leaders formed new defense plans. Governments poured resources into building stronger fleets, and scientists started researching new weapons and shield technologies. Humanity had been reminded that they were not alone in the galaxy, but they had also learned that they could stand up for themselves. Monuments were built in honor of the battle. A massive memorial was placed on Earth, showing a sculpture of the Resolute standing against a storm of alien ships. Names of the fallen crew members were engraved on shining metal plates. Families came from distant colonies to lay flowers. Some cried quietly, others stood proudly. Knowing their loved ones had helped shape history, the Velkari never forgot the day they met the Resolute in their military records. It was called the Human Wall, a moment when their unstoppable force met an unexpected obstacle. It forced them to slow down their expansion and rethink their strategies. It showed them that humanity was not just another weak civilization waiting to be conquered. For humanity, the battle became a turning point. It was the moment when fear turned into determination, when scattered colonies became a united force, and when one ship and one captain showed the galaxy what humans were capable of. The story of the Resolute was told in classrooms, shared around dinner tables, and whispered to children as bedtime stories. It was no longer just a battle, it was the birth of a legend, and so, the stars that once seemed distant and dangerous now carried a different meaning for humanity. They were not just places to explore. They were places to protect, defend, and claim. The Velkari had met their first equal, not in numbers, not in technology, but in spirit. Humanity had shown that even in the face of overwhelming power, they would not bow, they would stand, they would fight, and they would endure. The legend of the Resolute lived on, lighting a fire in the hearts of generations to come.